Hi there, I'm Sara Zarella, a portrait and wedding photographer and your host for Wedding Secrets Unveiled. This is a podcast where we cut through the complexity of wedding planning, leaving you with everything you need to know direct from the industry experts. If you want to simplify your wedding planning, while having fun, of course, you came to the right place. Join me while I guide you through your planning, starting from your engagement to your big day where you say, I do. After photographing for the past 18 years, I am sharing with you tips and tricks to cut through the excess noise because I believe from the moment you said yes, your planning experience should be a magical time in your life. Here you'll find episodes that are fun, stress-free, and straight to the point, with a fresh, honest take about the reality of what you really need to know about planning your perfect day. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Wedding Secrets Unveiled podcast, friends. So today I have my friend Katie on from Katie Ryan Events. She was actually one of our first podcast guests on episode number 5, but I asked her to come back on, and we're going to get into the reality of what the differences are of having your wedding on-site at a venue versus off-site at a private home. We're going to get into the logistics, the pros and the cons, and things to think about when you are planning an off-site private home wedding. It's going to be interesting, though, because Katie was on during the pandemic. So in the beginning of our conversation, we talk a little bit about how the world in the wedding industry has changed since the last time she was on. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my very interesting conversation of all the things you have not thought about planning your wedding at a private venue. Katie, thank you so much for joining me again today.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for having me again.
I just cannot believe it's been close to 2 years. Actually, 2 years.
2 years.
Since you've been last on.
Yeah, and there's so many different things that have happened in between 2 years.
It's just weird how time just flies.
I know.
So literally, Katie, you were one of my first guests on this podcast when it was in the very beginning, like infant stages. And I'm so happy that you're back because, like you said, there's been a lot in the world that's changed and a lot with you.
Yeah, a lot with me, a lot in our event industry and the world, yeah. So thank you for having me back on, and I'm excited to talk about all the new things and excited to share with you.
Absolutely. But before we get going, why don't you just let our listeners know a little bit about who you are, who you serve, and what you do in your business?
Yeah, well, so I am, Katie Ryan. They actually think that's my last name. That's my middle name, Ryan. My name's Katie Ryan McLaughlin, and I was a previous owner, co-owner of Leela Ryan Events, and which is when I came and spoke to you originally. I was co-owner of Leela Ryan Events at that time. And since then, I have branched off on my own to spread my little event planning wings to start Katie Ryan Events. So that is new. I am still a wedding and an event planner based out of Newport, Rhode Island. And I think, during the pandemic, this was something that I started to think about a lot during that difficult time and challenging time for the event industry. I started finding that, I had girls contact me from California and Texas and all over the United States and even Canada, Spain, and they wanted to talk with me. And at that time, they hadn't booked our services, but they remembered they made a really good connection with me. And so they reached out to me wanting to talk, and I spent hours talking with them and trying to help them navigate through that time, which made me think, I really wanted to offer different services and different planning options for each and every bride, not just a particular bride with a particular budget. I really wanted to think of creative ways where I was able to provide my knowledge and my experience to anybody that needed help with planning, not just because, everybody has a different budget, different, wants and needs. And I wanted to create different packages so that it wasn't for a particular bride in a particular budget. I think every bride, it's the biggest day of their lives. And I think every bride and groom deserve the knowledge and the guidance from somebody that's a professional that can help them navigate through those times. So I started Katie Ryan Events just a month ago. I am in the process of still branding and creating the website. There's a lot that kind of goes along with that, and I'm excited to start and offer different packages than I used to offer with Leela Ryan Events, and work with couples that I find a connection with, that I want to help and help guide and make their day really special.
I love it, because for our listeners, if they want to hear you when you first came on, I just looked it up. It was episode 5.
What episode are you at? I think like 49 or 50. Where are you at now?
We are up there. We are in our 50, like in the 50s. Yes.
Exciting.
I know.
Exciting. And I remember you said this was, you were just trying to figure out, and this was something you were going to try, and you thought it would be really good to have different vendors on and just start spreading the information that brides need in a different way, and talking with them and kind of going through every vendor's expertise and what they offer and really events from their perspective.
Exactly. And what's interesting is you talked a little bit about the pandemic and how it made you start rethinking your business and your expertise.
And what was important to me.
Correct. And so what happened with me and how I'm sitting here talking to all of you out there is I just wanted to get information out there. And
to help.
Just to help. Yeah. That was it. And I was just like, I don't know if this is going to work or not. And I've talked about this a few times on the show, but literally I've sent a 2 a.m. text to our co-host and producer, Dan. And I was like, I have an idea. And literally just in Dan's fashion, he's like, I can make this happen. And like, here we are 2 years later. And I am just so...
And wonderful things have come from this. Talking with brides that have listened to your podcasts, and talking with, actually, I've had a few mother of the brides contact me and say, hey, I heard your episode on Sara Zarella's podcast, and, everything you said, I just wanted to talk with you and get, your suggestions on where we should start right now. And it was really great to be able to provide them even just I know we talked about a lot of different things during that podcast, but I think that really helped them, and all of the other podcasts that you have, uploaded and provided on your.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say, is that I am just so happy and honored that this is helping so many of you out there. And with that said, though, I'm going to keep doing this because you guys are going to keep listening. But I would love to know from you, because we talked a little bit about the pandemic started to make people think differently or want to do different things. What is your thoughts now because we talked literally in the pandemic last time. What's your thoughts about post-COVID?
Well, I think there's some positive things that came out of COVID for sure. I think it took us a little while I had to really think about that, because it turned our world upside down in the way that we had to do business and kind of pivoted to make, as far as a planner goes, we had to pivot and change and be very creative with what we could do with the restrictions. But what I found, during COVID, and what's been, I think, the positive things that have come from the pandemic is that, brides and grooms are more, focused on, instead of providing this big celebration and it's about this party and, it's more about love and the family and the closeness. So I think the mindset of having a wedding and a celebration has changed a little bit of what's important to them.
It's interesting that you say that, because, and I think what you mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it doesn't matter the size. I mean, whether it's a 5-person wedding or a 500-person wedding, we are seeing larger and smaller weddings, but you're right, it's the mindset going in there.
And what it comes down to are the people that they love and having them surrounded instead of this,
empty celebration.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's interesting. I always say it's interesting. I hate that.
And I say So
yeah, well, that's okay. Interesting. It's our favorite words. Here we go, people. Katie, you really brought up something unique in saying that there is positives with the pandemic, because there really is. I have to say, I do not ever want to go back to the pandemic years. And for our listeners, this show is definitely not going to be about pandemic.
No.
I just wanted to touch upon that for
we definitely
a second.
don't want to. We have a little PTSD from there. I'm sure I can speak for all vendors on that front.
But with that said, it's interesting because looking back at that world, because it was just I couldn't even believe that was our world and our life. I would never want to go back to those years, but I have to say it was the most unique years, because as a photographer, I was photographing some of the most unique and inspiring weddings that I've ever photographed in my 21 years. Granted, I don't ever want to go back to that time, but I wish at the moment I was appreciating it more, because obviously we were just all a little bit high anxiety and stressed, but in general,
and we really didn't have the time to do that. So it was a lot different for us when you go and plan for a year, almost 2 years with these couple, or when you're on site shooting. We're so focused on getting the product going, and we had to go to the next. We didn't have time to really sit back and enjoy, and that was one of the things that I found, sitting back and enjoying what we created during that day. Which really filled our hearts up with love, because that's why we do what we do. We were right on to the next, not by any choice of our own, just the way that the schedules had fallen, or, the back-to-back events that we were kind of thrown into. So we didn't have time or really be able to enjoy that, which kind of, for me, it took away that happiness that I had, not being able to be really present in that moment, because I was thinking of the next event that was the following week, which normally, I don't do back-to-back events. So it was just, I didn't feel like my couples really had me present, and that was really sad for me.
And that's the thing. We were all in triage mode.
I think
and
so,
and I
yeah.
but what was interesting, and the positives of that is what we did learn, right, is that you cannot stop love. Mm-hmm. So literally we had the state telling us that you could not do X, Y, and Z. And people
were not telling us, and us figuring it out on our own.
Fair enough, that too. But people were finding ways to get married.
Yeah.
And they were finding ways to celebrate in the capacity they could. So, I literally thought that was going to be the end of my career. And what I realized is that what I produce and what I put out in that world, you can't stop. Like you can't, a pandemic can't stop it. The state can't stop it. The laws can't stop it.
Nope.
But here's the thing. With that said, fast forward now to close to 2 years later, there has been a shift in the wedding industry. I've seen certain traditions fade out, certain traditions come in, things changed a little bit. And like I said, that's a whole other topic for another day. But I just kind of wanted to just get your thoughts a little bit. And it sounds like a lot has changed for you. And there's a lot of positiveness that came from COVID when you see with your couples. And they have you now present.
Yes, absolutely. I do notice one of the positive things, which I love, because I always love, creating something different for each couple that really speaks to their personalities and what they want to do. And I was hearing, what's acceptable? What should we do here? And what's the traditional way of doing things? Well, traditional went out the window 3 years ago because we had to kind of figure out different ways to execute and create weddings that, weren't really what they were envisioning, but ultimately ended up being everything that they wanted. So, which I find really wonderful. I think that, the white dresses, the wedding gowns, I'm finding more brides being creative with their color, bridal gowns. So I feel that also the locations and the areas that they're choosing or considering getting married, whether that's a full buyout restaurant and making that a venue because it's smaller and their guest count's smaller because they originally started with maybe a 300 guest count, but then they really honed it back a little bit and wanted a very intimate ceremony, private homes versus venues, utilizing the beautiful properties that they have access to and making it very personal that way instead of maybe working or getting married at a private home, a venue location.
It's interesting that you say that because getting married at a private location has been popular, but you are right. There is a burst. And I find that sometimes that is areas where a wedding planner and coordinator is needed.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a big difference between venues and private properties when you're planning a wedding. And if you're kind of on the edge about which is best for you, this is definitely a great podcast for you to listen to, because I'm gonna, I think it's good for me to touch on some points during this interview about what's the difference between venues versus private homes. What is, different vendors you didn't think you needed, and things that are included that's not included with a private home property. So, let's start off with, venues versus private homes. When you're looking at venues, you have the building, the structure. When you're at a private home and thinking of doing a backyard wedding, you have to bring in a tent and think of, rain backup plans, which the venues usually have the rain backup plans as an option. You have to kind of think of both of, a venue versus maybe your private property or your private home. You have to think about the rain backup plan, which a lot of venues have a rain backup plan in place. But private homes, that might be an additional tent you have to think about. So instead of one tent, you might need two. So that's something that is important to think about.
Basically, from what I'm thinking, the best way of saying it is a venue, you have the structure and you have your options. Mm-hmm. Where a private home, it's like a blank slate, mm-hmm. and you have to just create it.
Yes.
So let's get
you make a 5-star venue in your backyard. Yeah.
With the help of you. No. Yeah. But all right, so let's start. Tell us a little bit about the difference of on-site versus off-site locations.
Okay.
Or venues and private homes. Just give it to me. Tell me the difference.
So with venues, when you're going to look at venues, you're typically signing a contract that the venues provide to you that you have a food and beverage minimum and a site fee, versus a private home. You don't have a food and beverage minimum or a site fee. That's your private home or property.
That's interesting. But sometimes I would assume the caterer would come with a minimum, or no?
No, the caterer doesn't have a minimum. So it's actually based on guest count and your choices. So the food and beverage quote-unquote minimum that the caterers would say is really the food selections and the bar selections that you make. It's not a minimum. It's just your guest count and how much that would be.
Interesting. Okay, so right off the bat, you're working with a completely different budget structure.
Correct. Yes. It doesn't mean it's any less, because obviously it's up to the couples and it's your personal preference with what you choose. So it can get a little pricey up there if you wanted to have raw bar and everything that you need for, to have a New England style wedding and things that are important to you. But yes, there's not a food and beverage minimum per se for caterers. So that's something I think to keep in mind. That's important. When you're booking a venue versus private home, the timing, you're signing a contract typically for 5.5 hours at a venue, and a private home, you have an unlimited time frame. However, when you're working with a venue, you can extend the time because they already have the liquor licenses included that they can serve alcohol up until 1 a.m. Say your event ends at 10:30 or 11, you're contracted in for. If you want to extend additional 2 hours, you can. The entertainment can continue, as well as, the food and beverage can continue. At a private property, you kind of run into the a couple of challenges with, having to get permits from the town, making sure the sound ordinance permits allows you to play until a certain time. And usually, from what my experience is, it's usually 10 or 11 o'clock. It never goes past 11 o'clock, as in a venue would be able to obviously extend much, much later with entertainment, because there's not a sound ordinance having to follow.
That makes sense. So you're constricted with the geographic area of what the laws and the rules are for your location, based on, like you said, entertainment, mm-hmm. and, how loud and your entertainment can be, versus with the venues, again, they carry more of, I mean, like you said, they carry more of the liquor license where you can be a little bit more creative on site. But again, I mean, at least where we are geographically, I can only speak about that, is I want to say liquor licenses are 5 hours straight?
Yes, 5 hours.
Yeah. So if you are at a venue that serves food or restaurant, it extends, right?
It extends, yep. So caterers that you would have to have on site for a private home event, they only have a 5-hour serving license. So that can't be extended. So, you can maybe extend the entertainment until when the town says, you
couldn't, but you can't serve booze.
But you can't serve alcohol, right. Which then,
but you know what it is? So
we think of ways to make it work. I mean, we have little secrets and tidbits that we manage to make that work, but the caterers are locked into having to follow their licenses.
And you literally took the words out of my mouth, and that's why working with an event coordinator can help you, but just kind of throwing one little nugget out there. I know for me, I got married at a private location, a private home. And there's interesting ways to work with making the party go without having the liquor being served. For me, one of them was the bar shut down a half an hour before the reception. Well, my party ended. And then we still had an extra half an hour to have fun and dance and just give water to everybody. And then we continued at a different location on the property for a bonfire after party.
Yeah.
Now, it rained, so that did not happen, but that was the plan. And there's ways around that, and obviously someone can contact you and you can kind of go over that. But
there's been a few private homes that wanted to have past champagne or specialty cocktails as guests arrive. And I wasn't able to provide that through the caterer. So I actually brought on my own teams that were tip certified, that were legal, able to serve the guests, and you're at a private home. So there's ways to kind of go around that so that they would be able to have that option and stay within the caterer's 5-hour liquor license.
Correct. Because, ultimately everything has to be done appropriately and legally. But like you said, ultimately, at least in this geographic location, the caterer has a 5-hour consecutive liquor license where the venues might have a little bit more flexibility, but there's ways to go about it and work around it. And that, my friend, is a whole other episode, but they can just contact you. So one of the things is, like you said, a little bit of a different structure of the time and how long you can serve liquor. What's another difference?
Thinking about venues versus private properties, the location. And when I say location, I mean, if you're working with a venue, typically there's hotels that are close by. It's easy to grab an Uber to the venue location. When you're at a private property, depending on how far away that is from hotels and, let's use in this area, Little Compton. They have beautiful private homes. A lot of people that have homes in Little Compton are right on the water. However, you run into the challenge of where are those hotel room blocks going to be for your guests? How long is it going to take to have the guests transported to the venues? And then we're looking at transportation as well. So I think, just something to consider when you're thinking of a private home versus a venue is the hotels that are nearby, where your guests would be able to stay, thinking about how long of a trip that is for your guests, because we don't want guests being on a bus or a trolley for, an hour to get to a private property location. I mean, it certainly can be done, but we want it to be as smooth and as enjoyable as possible to be able to have guests join you on your celebration. And I just think that's an important thing to consider when you're thinking of venue versus your private home, is where that location is and what's around that that your guests will be able to enjoy. And that's everything from, hotel accommodations to maybe restaurants that they can go and check out while they arrive into town if we don't have, other events lined up for them.
Katie's, we're going to take a quick break, and then when we get back, I really want to start talking a little bit more about the logistics and the cost differences and the pros and cons of both a venue versus a private home planning your wedding. I appreciate you being here, and hey, if you like what you're hearing, I encourage you to check out our website at sarahzarella.com. And don't forget, you can actually subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening so you never miss an episode. And I would so appreciate if you left a fabulous review on Apple Podcast. Even better, share it with a friend. It's a great way to show your support. And now, let's get back to the episode. Well, welcome back to Wedding Secrets Unveiled podcast, friends. So right before the break, we talked with Katie a little bit about how life in the wedding industry is different post the pandemic. And then we got into a little bit about what the difference is about having your event and wedding at a venue versus a private home. And we ended with the logistics. So Katie, talk to me a little bit about the logistics and the differences with having your event at a venue versus a private home.
So the logistics portion, it's night and day. So venues, again, you have everything on site for you at venues. I actually like to say an on site versus off site venue. There's two different styles. So you have venues that have the culinary team, the tables and chairs available, some linens included in your packages. You have the building, the structure, everything that you possibly need at a venue. An off-site premises location could very well be a building that you bring your caterer in. So it would be like a private home, but the structure's already there. It's not at your private house. And then you would be bringing in the caterer, tables and chairs, all of the rentals needed, but you still have that building, but the caterer is involved versus a on-site premises where everything's included, meaning food and beverage. And then private home is, like you said from before, starting from a blank slate. So, with private homes, you want me to go through the list of possibly everything you could possibly
need?
Whatever you think
the listeners would really benefit from understanding.
Yeah, so you would need, obviously, a tent. And with the tent, with logistics-wise, you have DigSafe come out and make sure that they're not hitting any of your piping or anything in the yard that's in ground. You have DigSafe come out and make sure that the tent can be placed in the area that you're thinking. You have to bring everything in through rental companies. So you have your tables, your chairs, your upgraded linens, flatware, glassware, bars, lounge seating, transportation. You have restrooms that need to be brought in. It depends on, thinking about parking. If you're going to provide transportation or if you're not, is there enough parking available? Possibly valet, golf carts, depending on how large the property is, being able to get, older guests that may not be able to walk down to the ceremony location. There's a lot of different things, I think, involved with property logistics. Also, a big thing is load in, load out time, I think, for private properties, which a lot of couples and as far as planners or when you're hiring a DOC at a private property, load in and load out are very important to me. That meaning like the tent, if you're getting married on a Saturday or a Friday, typically the tent's set up Wednesday or Thursday. You need somebody on site watching what's happening, understanding the location and what you're expecting as the couple. You don't want to be there. There's so many things going on that day or that week, I should say, where you don't want to be at your house. You want to be able to go get your nails done and get a massage and spend time with the family members and friends that have traveled far and wide to come and spend that weekend with you. It's important for me to be on site during vendor load-ins and load-outs because it's just the respect of the property, making sure nothing happens, everything is going in the right location, and that can be a 2 to 3 day process, which is unlike a venue, which usually is done in 1 day. And it's the same thing with load out. That's usually a 2 to 3 day process with vendors loading out of all of their equipment, their rental items, and me being on site watching that, making sure that happens and is done correctly with respecting your property and space is really important to me too.
I was going to say, there is something to be said about someone who's listening right now. They might be like, wow, I feel really overwhelmed because you just listed a lot of different moving parts for a private home or a private location where the venue already has this already figured out, right? Mm-hmm. So you just show up and the venue gives you some choices. But the pro of having a unique situation happening at a private home. Is like you said, it's an empty slate, right? But for somebody who doesn't do this every day, this is very overwhelming. So that's a lot of times why I do see event planners at the private homes, at least the ones that I work with.
Absolutely.
It kind of goes hand in hand.
It's so important. Even, when I first walk on property, my background is obviously, like I had said before in one of the earlier podcasts that I was in, I have a strong background in logistics and operations. So when I first walk on site, I look at it from not only the couple's perspective and the family and what they want to basically have and envision for their day. I walk on as a guest as well from the moment they walk off of the transportation and walk through where the ceremony location may be, over to cocktail hour, over into the tent for reception. I look at all of the, things that I see that may not be necessarily a good idea for them, because I see a different way that we could do it where their experience is much better. The flow is much better for not only their guests and them, but also the vendors that are on site as well, making it as easy as possible for caterers, explaining to them why something may work versus why something may not work, and why you shouldn't put, a bonfire in this location instead of, where the cocktail hour was. So I think just kind of going through that and talking through the property setup and the layout and what works best for you. Planners that have worked at private properties before, they have a really good understanding on what works best.
Exactly, because for us, right? I mean, I'm not a planner, but I have been to weddings after weddings after weddings every weekend at different locations. We have the experience we've seen, right? Where for someone who's planning a wedding, they have this vision, and sometimes they just need help executing the logistics because they're not thinking of all the logistics. And so I think in essence, you don't need to per se have a planner or a caterer who has worked on your property. Sometimes they haven't. Sometimes they have.
Oh, no,
sometimes
we've worked all over the place.
Exactly.
Yeah, every property, I think events planned at private homes, it's just like at a venue. It's just we're creating that venue at your home.
But that, like you said, there are logistics and things that a couple has not thought about. Like they might think, for example, I would like to have an after party with a bonfire, but then there's logistics of like who's setting that up and where is it going to be
Where's
placed?
the best location? The restroom location. They could say, oh, let's put it on the left side of the property. Well, the left side of the property is where the ceremony is going to be. And the last thing we want to hear is flushing of the toilets during a ceremony. When that's happening. And there's perfect places for everything, and that's why I think you need professionals on site to make sure that it's perfect. I mean, whether you're working with a venue or you decided to have your wedding at a private home, there's a lot of costs that are involved, and you want everything to be perfect. So to have a planner on site that is walking with you and knows, the best option for you and your guests and what the experience will be is important.
Most of the venues, well, obviously all the venues, they have an event or a venue coordinator. That venue coordinator knows that property. It's been trained, works there, so they can answer these questions. When you're going on a private location, you don't have that coordinator. Yes, you have the caterer who understands the logistics of what they need, but the overall vision. So I really do believe it's very important to bring in a event coordinator. But here's the deal, right? Someone who's listening might be like, okay, that's great and all, Sarah. Glad that you and Katie are saying that, but they're just seeing dollar signs because there's an expense there.
Yes,
Talk
there's
to me
an
about
expense.
that.
Yeah, well, there's an expense all around with private properties because, like I said, the time you can be a little more flexible with time and extend, but that also affects transportation, your photographer time, videographer, the entertainment for bands. Bands only book for 4 hours at a time. So if you're extending or wanting to have a very large, long celebration because it's at your home, all of these, there are additional costs in every vendor category that goes along with that extension over 5 hours.
Yeah, and I can tell you though, for me, I'm only speaking from right now from my personal situation because I did get married at a private location. And I did have an
Was
event.
it your house? Was it your house?
Yes. Well, at the time, it wasn't my house.
Okay.
It was at my parents'.
Did you feel when you started planning, were you like, wow, this is a little bit more than
So it's interesting you say that because I knew right off the bat, being in the industry, that anytime you go offsite
you need help.
You just need help. So someone like myself who has literally been through every step, 21 years doing this, and a photographer who's on site, I've seen it all. Like, I knew very well that even though logistically I could get myself from start to finish, I needed someone to execute that. And even then, there was some things logistically I didn't think about because we're all not all present. I mean, I was enjoying my engagement. So I knew, no questions asked, how big or how small my wedding was going to be. It was a smaller event, but what I'm saying is even if it went to a bigger event, I knew I needed – and so I had an event coordinator with me and who executed, I mean, everything from even the day before. I had a welcome get-together for my guests coming in town. But there was just small little things that they had to do. So I already knew I needed that. But I can tell you when I went through that process, I knew enough to set money aside for the event coordinator. But here's the deal. I also learned very quickly that coordinator saved me in a lot of areas too, paid for herself. Her services. That's
what I find with whatever package you choose, or if you decide to work with a planner, whether it's, a planning coach or a DOC or a full year planner. We ultimately, our goal is to listen to the couple, really understand what their vision is, provide that to them. But also I'm a stickler. It doesn't matter if they say they have an unlimited budget or they have, a certain cost that they want to stay between. I am focused on numbers and because I know what's out there and I know the perfect vendors for them that can save them. It doesn't matter if, let's say, a photographer is, anywhere typically between, let's say, $6,500 all the way to $15,000. If I talk with a couple and I know what's important to them, and we have unlimited resources and contacts that I would be able to provide them perfect fits for them within their budget. That doesn't mean that they're getting less of a product or less of a service. It means it's a perfect fit. It's exactly the photographer style that you like. So I think, having a planner be involved with the booking of the vendors, being on site, doing walkthroughs, as many walkthroughs as possible, or as many walkthroughs, honestly, as the couple feels like they need to make them feel comfortable we ultimately end up paying for our cost in no matter what package I think you choose.
And that's the thing, though, like you said. So everybody has a budget. They do. Whether it be like a very high budget or a very low, like you said, though.
They have an idea.
So they're like, we just took photography for instance. Like, there is a wide range for photographers. However, just because you have a certain budget set aside, you might need to spend more or less because you need to achieve what you want to get out of that that service. However, then you can then save it on in
different areas, absolutely, which is what we go through.
Right.
At least what I go through. I start with an estimated budget and I go line by line through vendors. I find out what's the most important to them and what's not, and kind of explain the process as they go.
And that's the thing, though. It's the other thing I was going to say is, at least for me, and looking at the logistics of a private, offsite, out-of-the-box wedding, right? Like, if you're having it and hosted at a different location, I just think it's very important to have an event coordinator with you. There's just way too many things that actually your venue, if you had it at a venue, is taken care of. That's what you're paying them for. And your caterer will be also taking care of a lot of things, but they ultimately are in charge of the execution of the food and beverage.
Correct.
So it's just really important to think about that. You just said it right there. I don't know if anybody caught that, but I sure did, is that, like, you're getting married and you think this is a perfect place to stick your bathrooms, but what you didn't think about is the flushing or the door opening and closing to your bathroom.
Or the sound of the water. I pay attention to every single detail, which, is important, and you want it to be executed flawlessly. So,
yeah. I mean, so even though you have this blank slate and you could do all these things, and no matter what size, there is logistics that go into that. And that also does, come with, do you want to handle that or do you want to outsource that? And if you outsource it, it does come at a price tag. Like I said, for my situation, I knew it came at a price tag, but what I did learn through the process is that price tag ended up saving itself. Mm-hmm. Like it paid for itself.
Mm-hmm. I oftentimes talk with potential couples on the phone that reach out to me, and they talk, sometimes they weren't expecting how much it costs or how much, a DOC would cost or a full year planner would cost or what private property would cost, because it is different. There's a lot more work involved. But I always like to say, if they are working with a band, you're booking a band. Bands are between $7,500 all the way up to, if they're coming out of New York City, all the way up to $38,000. Some bands, obviously Boston, you're looking at under 15, but like between 65 and 15,000. And you sign a contract and don't talk with them until about a month out from your wedding date. And they come on site, play for 4 hours, and leave. Planners, day of coordinators even. We spend so much time, months and months, years planning with you for ultimately the same price. And we save you money along the way. We're there executing day of. You don't have to worry about a thing. And I think it's really seeing the value in that.
It's also, too, I just feel it's very important to get, if you are going to have a coordinator, regardless if you're getting married at a venue or off-site, right? Mm-hmm. You have to find a coordinator that specializes in those. Those are two very different things. Very, very different things. For me, I see it both, right? But it's very different to have an on-site, and I'm not saying they can't overlap, but it's on-site coordinator at a venue where they're having weddings every weekend or every other weekend.
It's a well-oiled machine, right? Right. So as planners working at venues, I mean, I love working at venues. That's nothing. Yeah. I mean, I'm still going to be working at venues, and I love certain venues, which I can't say over this podcast because I don't want to be. But I have my favorite locations.
But the thing is, you're going to work differently at those locations because your role is different.
Yeah. Yep. As my role is different. It still doesn't change the fact that we attend meetings that the event coordinators or event specialists at venues do. We, create vision boards and timelines, and we're there making sure that all vendors are communicating with each other, which is really important to make a smooth morning and not have a stressful morning prep time. Creating timelines for transportation, hair and makeup, what that morning looks like to ensure you Sara, we've worked together before where we're steaming dresses first thing in the morning. We get there at 8 a.m. and have detail shots ready for you, everything, so that you're able to walk in and actually do your job instead of corralling everybody together. And I think it's important the vendors being able to step on site during that wedding day and providing the service that they're hired for, versus having to do it all and not being able to really fully focus on your craft and your specialty.
I think it's also too, you got to think a little bit about what ultimately are you trying to achieve, and what do you want responsibility for, and what do you want to outsource? And what I mean by that is, if you're a listener, and whether a family member is getting married or you're the one that's getting married, ultimately, if you decide that you are trying to figure out if on a venue or offsite is for you, right? And let's just go with the offsite, right? What are you willing to take on, and what are you willing to give out, right? As a bride that actually got married offsite, I can tell you I can do all the planning in the world, and I actually didn't need my event coordinator to do mood boards because I did it. Yep. Because I a little bit more of a niche, I'm in the industry. I planned all my vendors. I did all that. But you know what I needed? I needed the execution. Mm-hmm. I needed the load in. I needed the load out. I needed the logistics. I needed her to help me with that because honestly, as soon as my weekend started,
Property diagrams.
Yes.
Where the vendors are going to be located. Yep.
As soon as my event started, I didn't want to even think about it. She handled it all. I mean, everything from like, listen, I did it all do-yourself stuff. Like I got married in the year, like, a few years ago, where like signs were like really important for everything. Like I was telling people like that's dessert. Like no kidding.
That
right?
is a key lime pie.
That's a key lime pie.
And this is a guest book. Please sign my guest book.
Right,
This is gift card holder. Yeah. Yeah.
So I did it, right? But who was going to put all those out, right? So I had a caterer, and that was a fantastic caterer, and I had the event coordinator for the caterer, but there was other logistics, right? So I knew enough to hand that over to her. So I think if you can tell me a little bit about where does someone start with talking to you before we get into our wrap-up question, I kind of want to touch upon where does someone even start? Like, I know where I needed to start, right? But, like, if you decide that having an off-site wedding is for you, where do you even start?
I still strongly feel that they should call a wedding planner that's in their area. No matter where you're getting married, I think calling and talking to a few wedding planners and a few. Everybody's different. Everybody has different personalities. And there's, a lid for every pot, they say. And that's definitely true. You want to make sure that you're getting as much information as possible and making your decision after that. Because I think planners, when I certainly get on the phone with somebody and they're talking to me about a private home, I start talking about, logistics and what they need help with and what does the property look like. And I'll jump on Google Maps and we'll talk about the property looking down, and I can already see maybe what the best location is for a tent. And that depends on if there's even a slight
like dig
slant
safe and all of
yeah,
that. And
slight slant in their property, and if it's a flat surface versus how we would make it flat by bringing in a full floor for the tent kind of thing. There's so many different things to talk about. And after I speak with a couple, I can kind of get a sense of what they're looking for and what they need, and then I can guide them to the next direction, whether they're working with me or decide to work with a different planner. Absolutely okay. It's the nature of the business. But I think talking to planners and getting an idea of what they think they need or they should be thinking about for private homes is always a good idea.
I bet you, Katie, like I'm only laughing, and don't hate me right now.
No, I'm thinking of 1,000 different funny things.
I bet you, like, for example, right? Like, you just literally more nuggets right there. Like, more like you gotta think about a tent and like, does it a slope? And
I'm sorry.
So I bet you, like, these people call you, right?
Everybody.
I was about to say that. I bet you people call you and be like, okay, they're like one of the few event planners that you're gonna talk to, and all of a sudden they get off the phone and they're like, oh boy, I didn't think of all of these things.
I only touch on a few things during the call, and then I would obviously, send them an email with packages that I offer and maybe get a little more in depth in my email of things that I want them to consider so that I don't overwhelm the couple. Because off-site locations and private home locations, there is a lot that goes into it. I don't know if I mentioned the electricians, doing private homes at venues have everything you need. The bands just plug in. They might have a stage already, and private homes, I find that we need party panels installed and electricians on site and things that you just don't think about and that you need that ultimately could really affect your big day if the power goes out.
Right, and that's the thing. Like, as all joking aside, I was saying because I really do believe that that's step one. Call different planners because you will learn. I mean, just by listening to this podcast, but even if you didn't drop all that the first call, honestly, you should, because that's the reality. Yeah. It's like the reality is you could get married at a location, right? Even if it's not a private home, but it's a location that people use, but they don't use it maybe for weddings, and that's what makes it different. People don't realize that the logistics, like there's power surges. Like there's only so much power that can be plugged in. So you have the caterer, you have the caterer tent, you have the bands, restroom. There's so much logistics that do you want to deal with that or do you just want you to deal with it?
And you have to think about the wires running. Where are the wires running? Are they going to be covered or are guests going to have to jump over? I mean, you just want it to be perfect. You want to take your property and build a 5-star venue for your day. And doing that, you need professionals to help.
Yeah. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
So, Katie, I feel like I keep going back to my own wedding, and I'm so sorry for the listeners and you, but you know what? It's relatable for me, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I can remember on my wedding day, it's a fate memory because I didn't have to deal with it, right? We had an outside ceremony, and then we moved into the tent. But there was rain that came in.
Mm-hmm.
And
Good old New England.
Oh, yeah, you like that? And I remember distinctly looking over and seeing the chairs in the field where my husband and I got married, and then going in the tent, sitting at the sweetheart table, and then looking over, and they were gone. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. And I just moved on, right? But talk to me about that, because
this is funny you should bring this up, because I had actually this past season I was working with an amazing family. They had a beautiful home right on the water in Saunderstown, Rhode Island, and I was executing their rehearsal dinner. It called for a beautiful weekend. There was no rain in the forecast whatsoever. We actually released the tent 2 days prior for the rain backup for the ceremony location. It was going to be absolutely beautiful, 85 degrees, sunny. And at the rehearsal dinner, I was looking up at the sky, and I started seeing dark clouds come in. And as I was driving home, it was apparent that there was lightning flashes. It hadn't started raining yet, but in my head, I had already preset 180 ceremony chairs with the cushions on. It was all ready to go for the next day, which was the wedding day. And as I was driving, I knew the couple was enjoying their rehearsal dinner, and I just decided to start heading over to their home because I just had a really bad feeling with what I was seeing in the sky. And I got there in about 10 minutes. I had about 10 minutes before the sky opened up, and I moved 180 ceremony chairs into their tent. I picked up all of the florist boxes that were in like these. They have boxes that have the candles and all of their items. I lifted those up, put them on tables. I took all of the chair coverings and lined up the stage and the dance floor. So because it was kind of on a pitch, the dance floor, so the water was starting to fall down and go into not the best directions. But I went and moved everything that was needed. And I think that if there wasn't somebody there or a planner or somebody there even taking special care of that and noticing that and foreseeing that being an issue, that would have been a very tough morning to come back from. So
absolutely, you saved the day behind the scenes.
Yeah,
right?
It's always behind the scenes.
In that situation, they weren't even getting married yet.
No, and the mom told me the next day, she goes, we came home, we were so nervous, we saw it start raining, and she goes, I don't want to worry about anything. We'll deal with it when we got home. And when they pulled in the driveway, they looked outside and said Katie was here. And I was like, absolutely. I was. Yep, that was me.
It's funny you said it because with the example I was giving you of my own wedding, so what happened is my event coordinator called in the trucks to remove the chairs. I mean, we already got done getting married, but the reason why is because she knew, because she knows the players that she's dealing with, that my father would have been livid if, like, the next day it was raining and
the cushions would have been wet, everything. Yep.
But also, too, the truck would have had to came on the lawn on wet grass, right, and just completely would have destroyed the grass,
Absolutely.
right? So she's like, we're getting that out of the way. But also, too, for my rentals, I didn't want to damage the rentals, so and therefore I didn't have to deal with, like, damage fees.
Right.
They got the chairs out of there.
And we had a great vendor team for that wedding. I could have easily have called and asked for help, but it was also a Friday, and I knew everybody was working an event, and I had just finished their rehearsal dinner, and I had time. So, and every couple is so important to me, and if that means I have to go above and beyond 15,000 times to make sure that their event is absolutely perfect and beautiful, and for them not to worry about a thing, that's my job.
You saved the day.
Da, 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 da.
So with that said, it's time for our wrap-up question.
Okay.
What are some key points that couples should be considering when having an off-site wedding at a private location to ensure that their wedding day is a perfect event?
Absolutely thinking about the property layout and the logistics aspect of the load in and load out for sure, because that's just there's so much that goes into that. I would say the second thing would be to consider all of the vendors and offsite items that have to be brought into your property and what that entails. And the third thing would probably be, I think I would move that up to the top, but it would be hiring an event planner really to execute and to walk you through, your wedding and making sure it's perfect and everything has been thought of thoroughly, so that you have and your family and friends have an amazing experience on such a special day.
Love it. And I love having you on again.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited. I'm excited to start this new chapter for me as well. So
I know, and I'm so happy I was here when you kicked it off. And what we're going to have to do is have you on in another 2 years. Yeah. That's what we're going to do.
And see what we're doing then. I'll be writing a book by then, going off of your podcast. But yeah, I'm excited and looking forward to the future.
Thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of Wedding Secrets Unveiled. You helped our listeners become one step closer to their journey of a stress-free wedding planning. Can you tell everybody where they could find you?
Absolutely. So you can look at Katie Ryan Events at www.katieryanevents.com. Also, I am listed on Wedding Wire if you want to take a few peeks at reviews from past clients and couples, and ask Sara if you need to get in touch with me. Reach out to Sara Zarella and she'll give you my information.
Well, that's what I'll do. For our listeners, what I'm going to have Katie's information on our episode show notes, which you can find on our blog and our website at sarazarella.com/podcast.
Thank you so much, Sara. And I do hope I helped everybody at least a little bit. I know it's a lot of information, but there's a lot that goes into it. And I hope that I was able to provide some information that's helpful to future couples getting married.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, you overwhelmed me.
Yeah,
that's why
I think I even overwhelmed myself. I need my laptop in front of me at all times.
but that's the thing, Katie. That's why they need you. I mean, literally just sitting here and just listening to everything that you're going over, I'm like, oh, yeah. Like, I didn't even think about that. Well, thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Wedding Secrets Unveiled. I appreciate you being here. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, I want to tell you something. I encourage you to check out our website at sarazarella.com. We love photographing, while having fun, of course. Check out our podcast page on our website for our show notes, along with upcoming episodes with your local wedding experts. Listen in as we help you plan your epic event. And don't forget that you can actually subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening so you never miss an episode. I would so appreciate if you left a review for us on Apple Podcasts. Even better, share it with a friend. It's a great way to show your support and let us know what you think. If you know any wedding experts that would like to be a guest, we have a link directly on our website where they can let us know. Thank you for listening.